good evening, good day, good whatever time it is. I am Josh.
And I'm Marichen.
And welcome to another episode of Collector's Confessional. This is the podcast where two music nerds confess their love of music and the lives they lead. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I am tired, but I am good.
I feel the tired thing. It's been a long weekend. I still have an exam that I need to do and study for this weekend. It's due tomorrow, so doing good. And I get to get up at 4:30 in the morning to go to sunrise service. Woo! So
Huzzah.
I'm not ready for tomorrow, but Monday I am off work, so I'm pretty excited for that.
I am off work Monday as well, but that is because I am turning 30.
Woo!
So we're recording this on a Saturday. Our cycle is we record one week and then you're hearing it the week after. So we're recording this the day before Easter Sunday. So you're going to hear this probably after that fact, but happy Easter if you celebrate it and you're listening.
And then it's your birthday. I mean, come on now. Turning 30.
Right, you're right. It is kind of special. And there's a very special album I don't share a birthday with, but that is coming up that is very special to me. It is Temple of the Dog. If you know anything about the Seattle music scene, you know how very important that album is. So, me being 11 days older than it is kind of makes it really special. And then, of course, I spend that day on introspection because it's the same day that we lost Lane Staley and we also lost Kurt Cobain. So it is a day of introspection when it comes to music, but it's also a day I can just celebrate in general.
It's always good to celebrate a birthday. Are you doing anything special for turning the big 3-0?
I am trying to get a PlayStation 5. That's about it. We're still dealing with the human malware stuff, but I have had my first shot. So I'm at least more comfortable. But if it's going to be, if I'm not going to do anything on the day, it'll probably be delayed. I would love to go have breakfast at my favorite breakfast place, but all I'm really going to do is just listen to music, if I'm being honest. I'm going to just relax for the day, maybe listen to some records. And I hear rumblings that the record store day list comes out on that day.
I hope so, because then that means we might have time to record again and get our reactions.
Yes!
Especially since we're both off. We're getting Jared's new car Monday, which is really exciting, because we've been in the works of getting him a car, because his other one is kind of going downhill fast. So we've been working on it, and I took the day off so we could go get it.
Yes, that is awesome. What car is it, if you don't mind me asking?
He's getting a Chevy Equinox.
Nice. Chevy. I like that brand.
I do too. My family's a Chevy family, so they're all excited because his family has always been like a Ford family. So he's giving up his Ford Escape for a Chevy Equinox, and my family finds the irony in that and loves it.
I am a Jeep person, so I have a Jeep Patriot.
I want a Jeep so bad. I saw a Patriot today, and I was just like, I wish I could have that. A Renegade, a Wrangler. I don't care. I take it all. I ain't picky.
I love my Jeep Patriot. Love it. It's not that I can't haul things, but it's nice to be able to get furniture and be able to bring it back home. It does have some nice 4-wheel drive, so in case there are sketchy situations, which can happen. Sometimes there is snow in Virginia.
Yeah.
So that can happen, and it's nice to know with that. My old car was a Mazda Protege, and that thing had no traction. I was tailgated during a very icy time by somebody, and when I decided to put my emergencies on because he was about to go on my ass, he flipped me off, went flipping it in, and then there was somebody kind of also coming up behind me. So when you're trying to stop on ice, it's not like normal. I ended up perpendicular in a turn lane.
Got gotta love that.
And I so wanted to flip the person off behind me for like trying to be like too close. I'm like, it's ice. Stop it.
Yeah, some people just don't understand.
Yeah, but so I guess I move up in an age bracket. So I guess am I the Gramps and what's the beef Gramps?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yep, sure are. Kidding. My 30s are coming closer than I would like to think. I know I'll only be 22 this year, but before I know it, I will be in my 30s. So I'm not gonna shame you for being 30 because that's not old. I thought it was old when I was little, but it's not old anymore.
No, it is not. The 30s are, from what I hear, just as fun as the 20s on some regards. So,
well, I hope so for your sake, because this year's crazy too already. So,
so do you want to explain? We have a little saying around here. What's the beef Gramps?
Yes.
And Marichen, you were the one that coined that term. So, you mind explaining it again? Because it's been such a long time since we've had this explanation. And there might be some new viewers who don't know what that is. And we put it in the hashtag of every single episode, even if we don't mention it. It's kind of a coined catchphrase here. So if you don't mind, would you explain what's the beef Gramps and what it's all about?
Yeah, sure. So I think this stems back to our first episode together, which that's been a while. Like, man, I can't believe it's been that long. But basically we did this episode where we talked about getting into collecting records and turntables to use. And I know that a lot of younger people gravitate toward the Crosley Cruisers. And I was like, you know what? If that's what you can afford, buy it. Try it out. See if you like the hobby. Don't spend $500 on a turntable that you're not going to use and that you don't know how to use, and that you might not end up enjoying the hobby as much as you thought, and then you've lost $500 on a turntable. So it stems from that because a lot of the older generation likes to tell the younger generation that you have to have the best stuff right up front, and it's not true. You don't have to have the best equipment to start off. You don't have to have the best turntable, the best setup. You just need something that fits for you. And so I just kind of was jokingly like, what's the beef, Gramps? Why you gotta be so mean to these little people? Because I remember when I was 16 and I started getting into record collecting, a lot of middle-aged and older men specifically were looking down on me because I was this young blonde girl going into record shops, looking at records, and they would kind of like look at me like, oh, she's really gonna listen to that, or oh, I bet she has a Crosley. And I got those comments on my videos as well. And everybody I think that's my age or younger struggles with this sometimes, and it's not the entirety of the older community here in the vinyl community, because I have met so many older guys who are so nice and knowledgeable and really just want to help you. But there are some that do go about it in a bad way, and that's kind of where the what the beef Gramps comes from, is the ones who are rude about it and can be kind of condescending.
Right. And I started off with one of those all-in-ones that has the radio and the turntable. It has the same kind of turntable setup as the Crosley. So I'm not here to judge, but that kind of leads into our episode. And this one is kind of geared a little more towards our newbie crowd. But I think it's also just a great conversation as well. There are some record stores that I actually watch the YouTube channel for. Spin Me Round Records, The In Groove, Mike, really knowledgeable guy. It's I watch some of these YouTube channels weekly to see what's coming out. That's how I found out about one of the you're going to see in an upcoming video that is not even scheduled to be filmed as of yet. But I have a Ronnie James Dio Live album, and I had heard about it from the Spin Me Round Records YouTube. So generally, I watch a little bit more heavily when Record Store Day kind of rolls around, but I also like to watch every once in a while just to see what's coming out, because there might be something, jazz related or something like the Dio stuff that I probably wouldn't have known about. So very knowledgeable. But this idea comes from a video that I watched on Toad Hall Books and Records, a great YouTube channel. They did a live stream where they were talking about. It was also kind of to get people to come into the store too, which is I completely understand. But they were showing off albums that everybody they felt should have in their collection, and also that were easy to get. Like they could actually go to the store after the live stream was over and purchase those records if they wanted to. And I thought that would probably be a very, very kind of fun episode to just think about, from our perspective, Marichen and I, what albums we thought would be great for anybody to have in their collection. Now, keep in mind, this is our opinions. If we forgot one or there's, an album out there that, would be kind of better, we'd love to hear down in the comments below. But we kind of just thought, I thought of a caveat where it needs to be something that you could easily buy. And also, I wanted to get and say ones that I actually had from my collection. Which ones from my collection do I think everybody should have? And then I know, Marichen, you've done your own list as well.
Yeah, that's kind of what I did. I literally was like, what are the most essential, most played records that I can think of, like off the top of my head, that I own, that I listen to, that I love. And the list that I made, and we had some that were the same that we're going to talk about too, but the list I made was literally, I could have made more on my list. There were just so many that I thought were essential. And when we say essential, it's just things that we like. It's not necessarily for everybody, but
right,
more than likely you've heard of these. Like, it's very likely you've heard of these records, and there's a reason that you've heard of them, because they're great. And we just think that these should be in your collection because they're iconic albums that everyone knows and loves. And there's a reason for that. And we're going to kind of talk about that.
Yes. And even then, when we were all kind of working on our kind of the list and everything, I even have, we have about 20 each to talk about. And I even had 20 more that I thought of off the top of my head. So we can do another even follow-up episode on top of this. So
Oh, for sure, because I have more in my head that I didn't write down. I just sent you like the first 20 that I thought of. So
yeah, there is one from a band where we kind of differed, but I'm going to make it 21 for me just because, and I'll explain that when we get there. What I tried to do was I wanted to have at least one compilation, and you're going to hear one soundtrack. So I thought one compilation, but this one is just because it matched up, and there's really kind of one other compilation I want to add. So when we get there, we'll get there. But I think we've kind of categorized this, but I'd like to start out with the first album, and that's Billy Joel's The Stranger. Oh my goodness, this album. Well, first of all, if you don't know who Billy Joel is, shame on you. I'm just kidding.
I mean, who doesn't know who Billy Joel is? He has so many amazing songs.
Right. And this, kind of what we're talking about, like bands that kind of have that one album that is almost the greatest hits. If you know Billy Joel's, some of his music, you probably have heard a lot from The Stranger. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's an iconic album for a reason. There's some cuts on there like Vienna that is very soulful with the way he plays the piano and the way he speaks to you as the listener. There's just a bunch of stories that are on here. Scenes from an Italian Restaurant is a crazy song in itself, and I'm going to make a comparison for something later in the list. But it reminds me of kind of, not structure, but just kind of the way a song like Bohemian Rhapsody has acts to it. So it begins talking about two people meeting up after years and years of not seeing each other in a Italian restaurant. And then it talks about these two lovers, Brenda and Eddie, and the years and years ago. They're just kind of reminiscing on the past. So it's kind of like it has this distinct structure where it has three different acts where even if you might not like one part of it, you could probably find something to like about, you know, everything there. And I actually have, from Record Store Day a few years ago, and this is just kind of part of the conversation, I had the Stranger Live, where Billy Joel, in his prime, played a concert before The Stranger was even a thing, and premiered some of the songs on there. And let me just tell you, young Billy Joel had some energy.
Oh yeah, definitely. I love live shows. I have gotten so deep into watching live recordings and listening to live recordings. I've always liked live things, but even more so now because of everything going on, and I've had like withdrawals. But yeah, he is very talented. This album for me is not my favorite Billy Joel album, but I chose it because I feel like there's something for everyone on this album. And if you're going to get into Billy Joel and start collecting his records, this is a really good place to start, because this has a lot of his popular songs, like Vienna, you know, that you mentioned, is one of his most popular songs. One of my personal favorite songs to cry to if I need to have a good cry. But I mean, there are just so many tracks on here that I feel like you would recognize, even if you don't really know much about Billy Joel, but you want to learn about Billy Joel. And that's kind of, I think, my thought process for several of these records that I picked, is they're not my favorite from the band, but they are the most iconic and the ones you would probably know the most. So if you're just starting out, they would be good to have.
Exactly. And Moving Out, Anthony's song, probably one of his most well-known songs other than Piano Man, if I'm being honest. Only the Good Die Young, She's Always a Woman, The Stranger, Just the Way You Are. It is iconic, just in the way of how it kind of rocketed him to, not that he wasn't popular before, but to make him kind of a icon. This kind of was like his not thriller, but you know, his kind of step into the mainstream. You know, everybody has those couple of albums where there's a band where they have a couple of albums where it's like they have their kind of like diehard fan base and then they explode after one album.
Yeah, that's a lot of musicians, I feel like, that we're going to talk about.
And I think that, do you have anything else to say on The Stranger?
You know, I don't think so. I think you covered a lot. Like, I honestly didn't prepare notes as well as you did. I was just, like, going to go into it and be like, this album is great, and just talk off my head, and here you have, like, little speeches for songs typed out and ready to go.
Actually, I do not. That was all off the
really?
cuff.
Man,
it's just,
you're good.
I know The Stranger like the back of my hand. It is
a great album. It's why I chose it. I mean, it's great. I've not listened to it in a little while, but it reminded me that I need to go listen to some Billy Joel, because it's a great record.
It very much is. And mini spoilers, it's in my top 10 albums of all time. That's why I love it so much.
I mean, I would agree. It would be up there for me. I agree. I get it. It's one of those records that no matter what you're feeling, it just hits different every time you listen to it for me. It's so crazy how I can be happy and love it. I can be sad and I can love it. It's just a record that fits with everything going on in your life, at least for me.
Yeah, and even though there are some dates that are dropped in, say, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, this is an album that is timeless. It is kind of like one of those really good moments in time kind of capsules.
I feel like
if that
Billy
makes
Joel
sense.
is just timeless to me. Like, he's just such a classic.
Yes, and there are so many other good albums from him. I think, like Nylon Curtain is one that comes to mind. I would love to get the mo-fi of Nylon Curtain, but Billy Joel's The Stranger, no matter what pressing you get, you're going to have something to like about that. And even from, there are little things kind of subtly that I like about it, from like the saxophone cues in Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, or just the little ditty that he plays in Vienna, that just the odd kind of key signatures with that, and just the way he thought way back when he was making some music. And like I said, if you haven't listened to The Stranger live, it is very good. Like, to hear songs that would eventually become on the album, kind of early versions, it's really interesting to hear how much he kind of wanted to lay out for this album before it came out. And one of my other things that I kind of like is the way he sings as well. He has kind of a twang to his singing. It's kind of like, you know how you have like the Tom Pettys, the Johnny Cashes, the Neil Youngs, those unique voices and the way they kind of pronounce things.
Yeah, I could definitely see where you're going with that.
So, for example, in Caesar Italian Restaurant, there is, instead of saying Brenda and Eddie, Brenda is how he kind of says Brenda's name. So it's kind of like that little bit of twang. So you can kind of see, you know, his New York coming out a little bit in a better sense, you know. I know there are different parts of New York. You don't have to tell me in the comments, but it's just interesting to hear, you know, the tones and intonations in the way he talked about and tells all these stories. It's very interesting, and he's just timeless.
Yeah, I agree. He is 100% timeless.
Let's talk about another timeless band. I think we're going to keep this going. I know you had a Queen album on your list.
I did. I chose A Night at the Opera for my list, and I love A Night at the Opera. I think that it is a flawless record. It's not my favorite Queen record. My favorite is Sheer Heart Attack, hands down. I've discussed that before. But I think that A Night at the Opera is the one that you really need for your collection if you don't know a lot by Queen, or if you really don't have the funds to build a huge collection and you're wanting something from Queen, because you have Bohemian Rhapsody, their biggest song. I mean, I'm going to go ahead and say it's their biggest song. I know they have a lot of hits, but who doesn't know Bohemian Rhapsody? You have, I mean, great songs on here. I'm in Love with My Car, Death on Two Legs, 39 is great, The Prophet song, Good Company. This whole album is flawless. I think everyone probably knows this record, and I know some people are like, oh, I just know Bohemian Rhapsody on that record, and I got comments like that on my video that actually went up today about like, oh, there's more than just Bohemian Rhapsody to this record, and I don't know why, but that kind of was like, okay, sure. But there's so much more to Queen than Bohemian Rhapsody, and this album, like I said, it does have Bohemian Rhapsody, and it is that big album for them. But if you're only going to get one, this one would be the one that I would say to get, because it has that song, and that's an iconic song that you would recognize. And it does have some deeper cuts into it that maybe people wouldn't know if they really don't listen to anything other than the record you're going to talk about, their greatest hits record. If you only really listen to their hits, you may not know a lot of the other songs on this record, and you may not realize how great some of the deeper cuts really are. So I think for me, the essential is A Night at the Opera.
Yeah, also, You're My Best Friend is on there as well.
I can't believe I forgot that one. See, I'm like flying off the cuff, and I'm just not even here. I'm so tired that I'm not even thinking straight. I should have been better prepared.
You're all good. Also, when you get your new car, you're going to be in love with my car. Get it?
Yeah, no. You're in love with your car.
That was a bad pun. It's just the history behind that, and it was also Bohemian Rhapsody that made me kind of love this album just a little bit more. And I know some of the movie plays with the timeline, but to me, there are greatest hits bands, and then there's bands that they have an album that all the other albums are just as good, but their one album could be greatest hits. And then there are bands that, if you can only afford the greatest hits, that's great, but still save up for. Queen is that if you can only have the greatest hits, great, but save up for some of the other stuff, because there's some really good deep cuts out there on all the other albums, if I'm being completely honest. But the reason I did that, Queen Greatest Hits, I have a kind of magic, and I think that's more for like a diehard kind of Queen fan,
for sure,
kind of deal. Because I am a huge fan of the Highlander movie, And Queen did the soundtrack for that. And essentially, to me, this is studio versions of the soundtrack of the movie. So, I went with Greatest Hits because I feel that one is a little bit more accessible for people. Not everybody is as deep as we are into music, let's be honest. But there are some people that just want to get into records just to try it out. So I think you'd be okay with the Greatest Hits, but A Night at the Opera, I agree, is one that would probably be a good one to kind of, just get kind of the best of, not the best of the band, because the deep cuts are probably better than some of the hits.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually prefer some of the deep cuts to some of their hits. Like, whenever I go through a Queen album, I find myself loving the deep cuts more than I love the big hits. And I love the hits too. But over time, especially as I have listened to their music, more and more over the years, the deep cuts are what I really love to come back to. And honestly, I was between A Night at the Opera and the Greatest Hits whenever I was writing my list, because the Greatest Hits has so many hits from a lot of their early albums. And so you kind of have that mixture of some of their stuff in there. Like, it's not just one album. And I like that you get the mixture of the Queen albums, because you have Another One Bites the Dust, Play the Games on there. You have so many songs from different albums on that one record, and it's the best ones, I say that in quotations, on those albums. It's the ones that went big.
It's kind of the ones everybody knows, but that doesn't lessen their value at all, because they are good. And I just said that because I wanted to have maybe one Greatest Hits on here, but this I put Queen's Greatest Hits as kind of a just comment on Marichen's pick. There is one other compilation coming up that I feel would probably be a little better for what I'm going to be talking about, but you can't go wrong with A Night at the Opera or Greatest Hits if you're just trying to get something right now. So let's say A Night at the Opera is out of stock. You probably can find Greatest Hits. I know Target sells it. So, like we said, these are ones that you can easily go and get. And let's transition to another one. This one actually got a Target for somebody who didn't have this. And you were talking about, this is not the pick, but you remember how you were talking about it took so long to get you into Death by Rock and Roll? This person didn't have that album, and that's Amy Winehouse's Back to Black.
Yeah, I remember you not having that one for a while. I love Back to Black.
Yeah, and the person was a Secret Santa, and I got them the pink Target exclusive. Now, I had gotten Back to Black from a Christmas gift. And let me just say, Amy Winehouse, rest her soul, she had a gift in singing.
She did. I loved her voice.
Oh.
I think her death was one of the first celebrity deaths that really affected me. I was in love with her music. I thought she just had a really soulful voice, and she blends several different genres. She has jazz and blues and the hip hop and R&B influence, and she was on the pop charts and stuff, so she had so many different genres blended into her songs and her records. And I think that's what really drew me to her, is she had that very unique style. And for such a tiny, pretty little British lady, she had such a beautiful, soulful voice. And she did so much with the little career that she had before she passed. And man, Back to Black is just such a classic. I feel like no matter how old you are, no matter what type of music you listen to, there is a song on here that you can relate to. And you can really tell Amy wrote these and she was struggling, but she also had her happy moments in here. But this album overall is a pretty sad record, I would say. It's definitely one that I put on, just in general, but if I want a good cry, it's a good one to go to.
Yeah, it is very soulful. It comes from a dark place. And a lot of powerful music can come from a dark place. And it's it's just the soul, the old soul in that music. It reminds me of, have you heard What I'm Doing Here by Lake Street Dive?
I'm not.
There's some old soul in that singing. Ooh.
But
when you just want to sit down and just be engrossed in just singing that you wouldn't expect coming from the person that's singing it, Amy Winehouse is going to be that.
Yeah, Amy has kind of always reminded me of a modern Janis Joplin in a way, because Janis had a very powerful, soulful voice, and she had a lot of demons, and she wrote about a lot of those, and Amy did the same. And I love Janis too, so I really connected with Amy, and I always wonder what else she would have done if she would have lived and put out more stuff. Like, I wonder what else could have been. But the few
it's kind
Amy of records that we have are so amazing, and I love them. So
yeah, it's kind of like, what would, say, Kurt Cobain have done? What would Lane Staley have done? What would Jeff Buckley have done? And we could have another conversation on the 27 Club in itself. That could be that could be like a 3-hour conversation on that. But just keep things concise here. We'll try to keep comments brief, but there's so much to talk about when it comes to these artists. Let's talk about one of the other ones where we differed in Pink Floyd.
Okay.
So I'd like you to talk about your pick, and then I'll talk about my pick.
I was actually between ours again on this one. I chose Dark Side of the Moon, and I think rightfully so. I mean, hello, it's iconic. Everyone has seen the album art. Everyone knows this album. It is like one of the best-selling albums of all time, if not the best-selling album of all time at this point, and for a good reason. Now, this album for me, when I was younger, I could not get into it. It was something that I never enjoyed. Right. But when I started record collecting, I sought out Pink Floyd because I wanted to experience Pink Floyd the way Pink Floyd was supposed to be experienced. So I remember I bought a copy of Dark Side of the Moon, and I put it on and I listened to it front to back, and I loved every minute of it. So hear me out, everyone. If you're a newbie and you've not been able to get into Pink Floyd, buy a Pink Floyd record. Buy this record that I'm talking about. Buy the record that Josh is going to mention. Either of them you can't go wrong with. Just listen to it all the way through, and it will change your mind on Pink Floyd. Now, am I a diehard Pink Floyd fan? No, I'm not going to sit here and claim to be like #1 fan of Pink Floyd or anything. But I think that for me personally, I really had to listen to it in full. And I still, with Pink Floyd songs, I don't like to just pick them out. I like to listen to albums in full from Pink Floyd. And there are bands and artists where, like, I feel like I can pick out songs and just listen to at random. And then there are those bands or artists where I want to listen to the full album, and I don't want to listen to them in any other order other than in that particular order. And for me, that's Pink Floyd. Right. Because the songs interconnect so well that I feel like you're missing that experience if you just hear one random song. And it's such an experience to listen to Pink Floyd on vinyl. So I highly, highly recommend Dark Side of the Moon because you cannot go wrong with that album. Because like I said, it's got a ton of hits. Everyone knows it. You've seen the album art. You know this album. Even if you don't really know the album, you'll recognize a lot of classics on this one.
Right. And keep in mind, it might be a little more on the expensive side of the ones we're talking about. You know how much the newer reissues are, so
it's about $40 for a new reissue. And honestly, if you find a really decent original or even a little bit older of a repress, but not like a modern reissue that's brand new, you're still probably going to spend between $20 to $30. Let's just be honest.
Right. Yeah. Tell me, have you heard of the idea that Dark Side of the Moon, I think it's Dark Side of the Moon, syncs up with The Wizard of Oz?
I've heard that, I think. one of their records does, doesn't it? Or it's supposed to, or something like that.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's like after a certain point, you put on the album. Yeah, it's Dark Side of the Moon. But after I think it's the third roar in the intro, you're supposed to listen to Dark Side of the Moon, and it actually syncs up with the Wizard of Oz. Something to think about.
That's very interesting.
I've
always heard that, but I've never really looked into stuff like that. I love hearing random stuff like that, but then I never go check it out to see if it's actually true.
I did check and see if it's true. So it is Dark Side of the Moon. I chose The Wall because it's The Wall.
I mean, it's a good choice.
It is iconic. The movie is iconic. The story behind it. When I think of the idea of a concept album, my mind goes to one of two places. Another album that we're going to talk about later is on the list when I think of the concept album. And I think of The Wall. Roger Waters, the idea that he had behind it, putting up that proverbial wall between him and the audience, and just the experiences that he went through as a youth. I will never go through the experiences of a British schoolboy during a couple of the world wars. But damn if this album didn't make me try to understand how he felt going through some of that. There are so many good moments on this. Goodbye Blue Sky is one of the songs that I always like to talk about on this. You've heard it on the radio, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. There are just so many iconic moments, but when you actually and sit back and, think about it as a whole, there could be another 3-hour podcast where we talk about the entire story of Pink Floyd's The Wall. There's a reason why it's talked about so much and why a lot of people go in and say that this is an album to have, because with either of these two that we just talked about, you cannot go wrong.
Either one. If you find either of these, pick one. Either one you will love.
My recommendation is they are on streaming, which is great. Listen to them on streaming, but don't pick out songs.
Yep, you got to listen to it all the way through. That is what was keeping me from getting into Pink Floyd, is just picking random songs here and there to try and get into. Listen to it in full. I don't care what album. Pick Animals. I don't care. Whatever album you want to listen to it in full.
Metal is also a kind of underrated one that I recommend. Yeah, it is good, but it's not on our list for a reason. But we talked about this one earlier, and I think we could talk about one that we agree on again. Michael Jackson's Thriller.
Thriller. I love this album.
What can we say that's not been said?
I remember this was another celebrity death that really affected me too, because I really hadn't gotten into a lot of Michael Jackson's music when he passed away. I just knew a lot of his huge hits. And Thriller obviously is a huge hit. It's a huge album for him. It has so many wonderful songs on it. And when I really thought back to essential albums, this come to mind because when I really got into Michael Jackson, this album was one of the first that I listened to because it was very notable. And it hit me so hard, and I fell in love with it immediately. There was nothing that I didn't like about the album.
Yeah, it's even the idea that Vincent Price is on this with Eddie Van Halen, and just all everything that's on this album, and Sir Paul McCartney on there too. You think of an album that has Vincent Price, Eddie Van Halen, and Paul McCartney would be one of the weirdest experiences that you could ever have, and it's not. That was the genius of this album. I remember where I was when Michael passed, and I was at my first job ever as a pizza cook at a water park, and I had heard about the news on the radio, and I was like, when he was going to the hospital, I'm like, ooh, this doesn't sound good. I just, I remember that in any of the radio hits. This is another one also where if you don't know where to start, kind of like Billy Joel's The Stranger, you could be pretty sure that you'll know something
Oh
off
yeah,
of
there's
Thriller.
so many big songs off of Thriller. You're guaranteed to know something. And again, on this one, there's something for everybody. This is his big album. And it's the best place to start. A lot of these albums we're talking about are their bigger albums because it's the best place to start to really get into them and see what they're about. And not that like they sound the same every album or anything like that, but this is what is
No.
critically acclaimed, what people love, what most people have in their collection. I feel like the albums that we're talking about, most collectors who've been collecting for a while have these albums. And they've just become essential for a reason because they're so good.
And just, the iconic nature of it. And this is going to touch on another artist I'm going to talk about later. Eddie Van Halen kind of coming on for Beat It, doing the guitar solo and everything. What's funny is I remember reading an interview, and I think we said this on the live stream that we were on talking about Eddie Van Halen, where he was, it was just for unknown Michael, not like well-known Michael Jackson at the time. And they had released, I think it was 1984 at that point. And it shot Michael Jackson to stardom, and it hindered their own album when he went on to be basically kind of like a kind of quiet, unpaid credits.
Yeah, I think we did talk about that, didn't we?
Yeah, that was part of another live stream, not on here. But it's if you know Michael Jackson, like some of the songs that are played over and over on the radio, you're gonna know this album. And the reason we also chose these kind of well-known albums, again, is the ease of being able to buy them in the store.
Because these are, more than likely, they're accessible because they're so popular. I could have chose some really obscure stuff that I thought everyone should own, but it may not be very easy to find. I love a band called The Maine. I could have easily put one of their albums in here. But once their albums sell out, they become hard to find. They're expensive. And as much as I love them and consider them an essential in my collection and want to share their music with you all, they're not very accessible because they are an indie band.
Exactly. And I have one other pick on this list, and when we get there, I'll explain it. It's one that you could get at a record store. You probably have to ask for it and wait a little bit. You can get it used for like $7. So a lot of these I picked, at least for me, were ones that I could easily go to, say, my local shop, or if your only shop is a Walmart, or if you have to buy online, you can easily find these. So let's talk about another prolific artist. Unless you have something else to say on Michael Jackson.
I think everyone knows that album and knows they need it.
Let's talk a little bit about David Bowie.
Again, David Bowie, classic artist here. I feel like you really can't go wrong with a lot of his releases. Personally, I chose The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Okay, we all know the album. Iconic. I'm not even gonna really explain why I chose this one. It's iconic album artwork. Everyone knows this one again. Everyone knows hits on this album. For me, it's also, again, kind of that nostalgic point for me because it was the album that got me into Bowie. It was one of the first like full lengths that I reached out to, aside from knowing his hits and things like that. But this album, I feel like, again, you can't go wrong with because of the hits on here. And even the deeper cuts that people may not know off the cuff, they're great. And everything about this album is great. It's very accessible. If you want a new copy, very easy to find. Used copy, semi-easy to find, kind of depending on where you're at. But either way, you can find this album. There's no way in the world you could not find this album decently priced.
Right. Right. I chose his self-titled, also known as Paralophone, because it does have Ziggy Stardust on it. I could have went with Everything Has Changed, but that is a compilation, and I want to say my compilation. But what I love also about Bowie albums is if you eventually decide to move up with your system, some of his albums are the best things to test your system with. Because it's just the way he does, with bass in some of the music, for example, the song Let's Dance. I popped that on to test my system, if I'm that particular song. But the way he crafts his music can really test, and if you get a good sounding version of it, you'll really enjoy it. So Bowie is one of those artists where if you want to test, like, just in general systems and stuff, you're not going to go wrong with a bunch of his music. That was one that hurt when we lost him, if I'm being honest. But he's also one that I don't reach out for all the time, if I'm being honest. But, I mean, you can't go wrong with a little David Bowie. I mean, what can we say that has not been said about David Bowie? Like, it is... I'm even struggling for words here because what else can we say? He's also one of those ones where you don't necessarily have to listen to the full album. But if you're into listening to the full album, that's why you buy records. You're not going to go wrong with either one.
And I mean, there are so many like compilations and so many other albums. Like, I love The Man Who Sold the World. That's one of my favorite Bowie albums ever. But I understand why it wouldn't be for everybody and why it probably wouldn't be the greatest record to start your Bowie collection with, because there's not really a lot on it. And, a lot of people, I don't know if it's just like my generation, but they don't realize that David Bowie sang The Man Who Sold the World and Nirvana just covered it at the MTV Unplugged session, where it's like, Nirvana's biggest record, I guess, outside of Nevermind, because I hear a lot of people talk about Unplugged and Nevermind, but they think it's a Nirvana song.
Did they not listen to the end where even on the radio he says that was a David Bowie song?
I don't understand why people don't know that it's a Bowie song, because I mean, like you said, it clearly states Bowie song.
Speaking of the Seattle grunge scene, I'm going to talk about one of our ones that we kind of differentiated, Pearl Jam 10. Like, it is Seattle grunge. It was kind of tied with Versus in Yield, but if you want kind of a classic, you don't know how to get into Pearl Jam, 10 is going to be your best option. There are just so many iconic songs from the bands, and, there was the Nirvana, there was Pearl Jam, there was Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains. The Seattle Big Four, as I like to call them. But Pearl Jam 10, you cannot go wrong with any one of the songs on there. You could either go with the more recent, just normal pressing, which has gone out there. I have the 2 LP set where it has the Brendan O'Brien 10 Redux, where their longtime producer went back and produced their first album and mixed it. So you cannot go wrong with any of the songs on there. If you know any of the Pearl Jam songs, they don't play any of the deeper cuts because most of their well-known songs are going to be on Pearl Jam 10. And, if you haven't, looked into their lyrics or everything, there's some dark stuff on that album. Like, really dark. Like, if you think Jeremy is the darkest,
no. Not quite.
Marichen, you know what Alive is about,
we've
right?
talked about it before on our podcast, I believe.
But essentially, for those who haven't listened to that episode, Alive is basically about a kid who ends up looking a lot like his dad. His mom goes crazy and sleeps with him. And then there's like a trilogy of dark stuff that happens after that. So it's part of a trilogy. But yeah, thinking about that on the radio, yeah, kind of crazy, but it's you're either going to like Eddie's singing or you're not going to like Eddie's singing. But if you had to pick kind of one, you have to have this album just kind of your start point. Because again, we're trying to target those people that are kind of new. And even if you don't have some of these albums, you might hear one that you might have not heard before. So, Pearl Jam 10, I don't know how much more I could say on that. It's one of those iconic albums.
It's a great album. I really enjoy this album. It's so good. I remember when I bought it on vinyl and I listened to it for the first time on vinyl. It was just such an experience for me because it's an all-around amazing album. And again, it could have been one of my picks too because there are just so many great essential albums. And it was one that I just didn't think of. And then when I saw your list, I was like, yeah, that would have been a good pick.
Let's talk about one that we both thought should be essential. Sir Elton John, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite albums of all time, if I'm being honest. If you know me well, you know I really love Elton John. And for me, it was really hard to pick an Elton John record because there are so many amazing Elton John records out there. But I felt like overall, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road is very well known. Obviously, you have Goodbye Yellow Brick Road on here. So many other classic staples. But I was actually between that album and Madman Across the Water because there are so many good ones on it as well. But I feel like if you're going to collect Elton John, you don't know a lot about Elton John, this is a really good place to start because it is a really well-rounded album. And I mean, you could even go with the greatest hits on him too because his greatest hits is a great record too. He has so many that it's hard to pick just one. But if I literally could only have one Elton John record in my collection, it would probably be Goodbye Yellow Brick Road.
Yeah, and it's that just again, we keep saying iconic songs. If you know Elton John, you know a lot of the songs on here, and it's I even just like the artwork on it. It's like one of those albums where I love the artwork overall, and then there's an album along with it. There's a little bonus there, so album artwork can say a lot about an album.
Album art can help or hurt an album. And I think in this case, it's a very attractive album all around. And it makes you want to listen to it.
Speaking of album covers kind of here and there, I know you have one from the Mamas and the Papas. So
yeah, I chose If You Can Believe Your Eyes and Ears. It is their debut. And it's, again, not my absolute favorite from the Mamas and the Papas, but I think that if you're going to get one, if you're going to start off with one, get this one because you have their big hits. You have California Dreamin', one of their biggest songs on this album. And overall, you really can't go wrong with the experience of this album because it is just so ethereal to me. And I have never been like a huge folk pop fan, but this band for me has always dominated that genre. I don't listen to much folk pop really outside of the Mamas and the Papas and another artist that we're going to talk about, but this album is just overall amazing. And the album cover that you're talking about, it's a bathroom scene. They're all in the bathtub and they're clothed. They're not naked. Okay. But of course, what else do you have in a bathroom? A toilet. And there is a head in the toilet. And it's very rare to actually find a copy of the album where you can see the head in the toilet. Because they did cover it up with like a little hype sticker essentially, but it's printed on the album. It just said featured and blah, 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 blah. Because I don't exactly know like what they didn't like about it, but they're like, no, can't do that. I mean, I never really even noticed it until I got into collecting records and kind of dove down the rabbit hole and was like, oh, there's a head in the toilet. Interesting. And that was about my only thought on that. I don't know. I guess it was considered inappropriate.
It's kind of like the butcher cover of the
baby
Beatles.
Dolls. Like, I don't understand. It's Baby Dolls.
Yeah, but that's the way it is.
It's a totally different time period, too. I feel like there are worse album covers out there now. Oh, yeah. But again, it's totally different time period when those albums were coming out, so I get it.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to say on that? I'd like you to expand if you have more thoughts on it.
I know. I feel like so off the cuff right now. I think that for me, this record is essential because it's a different genre than most of these records that we're mentioning. And I mean, it's still kind of in that classic album kind of thing. Like, a lot of people know who the Mamas and the Papas are. This is still from kind of the same era that we're really talking about a lot of in this video, but I think that this is very underrated, and the formation of the Mamas and the Papas was very cool and fun for me. And this record was just so fun. Every song on here is just super fun, and I love Cass Elliot. She's one of my favorite artists ever, and she was gone way, way too soon. I love her voice, and a lot of what attracted me to the band was her. She really captivated me, and I got heavy into her solo career as well. She had amazing vocals, and she was just amazing all around. I would have loved to have met her. Like, I just wish I could go back in time to meet her. She's an idol.
Yeah, I think everybody has that, like, one band that they'll go back in time and go see live, or would love to kind of see in their prime, and not just, watch like old documentaries and listen to old live recordings. You know what I'm saying?
For me, it would be very hard to pick because I could think of a few that I would like to go in time and see, but I think that for me, even her solo stuff, I would love to see her solo too, because she is so captivating. And I think what I also really connect with her about is she was a plus size woman, and that was not considered pretty or popular at the time. I mean, it's still very looked down on in our society to be plus size, and she had so many struggles with being a plus size woman, but I think she was gorgeous, and she had such a gorgeous voice. And I mean, I loved her style. I loved the way she presented herself, and even though she wasn't very confident in herself all the time, she presented herself as though she was confident in herself. And she just seemed like such a sweet soul. And I love that she is a role model for so many people. And she's one of the plus size women that I think of that broke the barrier, because, when you think about it, there aren't a lot of plus size females in music or in Hollywood or and things like that in general. And I love that she really broke the barrier for that.
Yeah, it's iconic again. I have it, but I don't have the I have the censored version.
I do too. I would love to get one without the censored cover, but I don't know if that'll ever happen.
Stranger things have happened. I mean, you said you found you said one time a promo copy of Versus.
I have that,
am I correct?
Actually, in my collection. And it was sealed.
Yeah. That is probably, that would be kind of like I die if that happened. It was
so hard for me to open it. Like, normally I don't have an issue just ripping the plastic off of a record, but I was like, do I do that? Do I really do this? Come on now.
You're buying records to listen to them, and a promo pressing is probably one of the best it's going to sound because it's early pressing. So, We're gonna go. We were just talking about, you know, the bands just a second ago that we'd love to go see if we went back in time. And Led Zeppelin's going to be one of those bands for me. Both of us had picked something from Led Zeppelin, but I think I know why we chose two different thought processes on it. So, Marichen, I know you chose Led Zeppelin too.
For me, this is the best Led Zeppelin album, and I know so many of you are going to come for me and be like, no, it's not. It's blah, blah, blah. That's fine. Whatever. I'm not going to claim to be the biggest Led Zeppelin fan in the entire world because I know their songs, I know their stuff, but for me, this is the best album you can get. You have Whole Lotta Love, which is one of their biggest songs and it's on this album, and it's amazing, and the way this album flows together, the album art on this, I love the album art. That may be an unpopular opinion. I don't really hear a lot of people mention the album art on Led Zeppelin 2, but this is, I know, right? Like, you can't go wrong with any of their album covers. I feel like they have very different album covers, and I feel like there are so many that are iconic, and they're not all amazing, but they have a different turn sometimes, but so many great albums in their discography.
Yeah, and I'll say this, you have Ramble On there, Heartbreakers on there, and then, of course, the song that makes me love John Bonham. And we talked about this in the episode where we talked about our dream bands, and I said, John Bonham is my favorite drummer of all time.
Yes.
And it's because of Moby Dick.
I was going to get to that song.
That is
it is so amazing. Oh my God. I remember the first time I heard that song, I was blown away. And I mean, I literally don't know what else to say other than I was blown away.
What? The thing, the way he played, and especially what he did with those bongos. Oh, I could talk for hours on just the style and intonation and the way John Bonham, hit the drums, essentially. But I think this is more kind of one of their more bluesier albums. And for me, Led Zeppelin is a proto-metal. Like, I consider them metal, but they're kind of metal. Like that album.
Before metal was huge and...
like,
yeah.
Before metal was kind of a thing. And then you also have like bands like Nazareth. Mm-hmm. I've said this before, or Sweet, where they're kind of like the proto... laying out the groundwork that would be metal. And the reason I went, mine is Led Zeppelin 4. Now, I've said the story over and over again. I'm not going to go into it here, but it's ingrained to my collection as a whole. And if you love Stairway to Heaven, it's on there. It's just kind of everything, It is, to say iconic is, it is to say, iconic is beyond what
it really
this album
is. This is another great choice, honestly. It was the first Led Zeppelin album I put into my collection, like my physical collection, because it's very easy to find a copy of this. I had a very hard time finding a lot of other Led Zeppelin albums, and I mean, you cannot go wrong with Untitled 4, whatever you prefer to call it. You can't go wrong with it. Black Dog, Misty Mountain Hop. Great album.
Beyond great, in my opinion.
It's Led Zeppelin. Again, I feel like you can't go wrong.
No, you cannot go wrong with Led Zeppelin at all. Because just the four of them, back when they were, huge. And what's funny is I found a lot of my own personal collection is heavily 70s.
Honestly,
you think I was born in that era?
I have so many 70s records. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. But, just the style and everything, you can't go wrong. And some people might put in the comments, well, why didn't you say this R&B record, this and that? Everybody has their own different tastes. But, I feel that, there is a lot to be, offered there, especially with these two, But I think we've gone there. I'd like to talk to you. I'd like to hear from you about one Carole King. I'd like
Tapestry
to hear about
by
that
Carole
album.
King. I feel like you cannot go wrong with this album at all. Again, she has such a beautiful voice. She writes amazing songs, very great piano player, and I honestly, it's weird how I discovered her, and maybe not so weird, but some people who grew up in the era where she was popular might find it weird. But I am a big Gilmore Girls fan, and if you know anything about Gilmore Girls, you know where I'm about to go with this. She sings the theme song for Gilmore Girls, Where You Lead, which is on the album Tapestry. And I always loved the theme song. I remember I would sit there in front of my TV and be like, where you lead, I will follow, and just be singing along and mindlessly not knowing who it is. And finally, one day I was like, I want to know who this is. And I looked it up, and I looked up that album, and I listened to it, and I have never looked back. That is just an essential record for me. I remember I found it in a dollar bin one day when Jared and I were digging, and I was like, you don't have this record, I'm buying it for you, you're gonna listen to it and you're gonna love it, because that's how much I love it. So yep,
you're gonna listen to this, mister.
If there's
now.
one album that you listen to that you've never heard of that is on this list, this would be the one that I would recommend to go listen to, because I do think that a lot of people love this record, but I do feel like kind of in the vinyl community, it isn't talked about enough, or as much as it should be, I should say.
Right. I don't have it. I need to. That's probably going to be one that I'm going to put on my list.
I can't. Oh, no. Oh, I'm going to have to find a copy to send to you. No, I'm like,
you're glaring at
I can't
now,
believe you didn't have this record. That was the first thing that popped into my mind. Was no, I can't believe you don't own this. Because, whenever I showed Jared that record, I was like, I can't believe you don't own this. Why don't you own this? It's such a timeless classic. So, yep, you're going to be getting a Tapestry soon if I can find it, so.
Well, I have a package to send your way, too, so we'll have to do a little exchange there and talk about it. But, I'd like to talk about one artist on my list, and we've not even touched on this era just yet, but that is the 80s. And I was kind of between two, but I just decided to go with this Phil Collins, No Jacket Required. You're either going to be a person that loves Phil Collins, or you're going to be a person that's like, really? Oh God, Phil Collins.
Kidding, I love Phil Collins.
Oh, I love Phil Collins too, and even Genesis. I almost
Me
put
too.
Invisible Touch
no way.
on this list.
Oh my god.
If you don't have it, go get it. I actually found not an OG pressing. I think it's an OG pressing, but an earlier pressing when I was at I can't. I think Antique Mall. There it was Antique Mall, but it was a 45,000 square foot antique mall. And when you got towards the back of it, it was so brick that you literally had no cell phone signal. It was like you were crate digging in the old times.
Man, to go back and crate dig without Discogs.
And there was a pretty decent one stall there where they had their albums stacked vertically, and literally it was shelf upon shelf upon shelf. There was some 10 inches that I'd never seen before there. So when you come, it is a little bit of a drive, but we're probably going to go to that.
I don't turn down record shopping. If I do, I'm sick. Check my forehead. Do I need to go spend money?
Paycheck.
No, but am I gonna go spend money? Heck yeah.
No. Yes. This is one of those albums that has a lot of his hits on it. Like, if you want to recognize pretty much like 90% of the album, you're gonna listen to this album. One More Night, Studio, Don't Lose My Number, Take Me Home. Like, that man almost created the 80s, if you think about it.
I mean, I love a lot of his 80s stuff. I mean,
Gated Reverb.
Amazing.
Like, they're just, like, Inside Out, Doesn't Anybody Stay Together Anymore? That's a good one. Like, there's some really good deep cuts on this. But then you'll listen to a couple of songs like here and there, and be like, oh, wait, I know this one. Oh, wait, I know this one. Oh, wait, I know this one. And the reissues, I got one for Christmas where somebody painted the Grinch's face on top of it, which was the funniest thing ever.
Cute.
But it was. And I'll probably get like an actual album jacket, so I actually have the album jacket, because that album is iconic. But to read the thought process that he had about reissuing, there's a nice little essay written by Phil about the album, about the reissue, on the reissue. So when artists take time to do that, he seems to be one of those ones where he takes the time to think about, the album and everything going on there. And man, does this album sound good. Like, just the way he created music back in the day and the way he went about doing that. Of course, we're talking about gated reverb and all that stuff, but that's more music snob stuff, and we can go to that another time. But, yeah, I don't know how much more to really say on that. I mean, we almost picked another one together. We were kind of on the same wavelength. It's just iconic is, again, more on the same that we're saying.
Great record.
It's another great record.
Yes.
Fleetwood Mac Rumors.
I love this album.
And for me also, the inner turmoil the band went through. For an album that almost busted up a band. And one of their best. I'm not going to say their best, because some of the earlier stuff is really good. Like their self-titled, and even Bare Trees is pretty good too. But there's a reason why it doesn't stay on the shelf for long if it's reissued.
Overall, it's a very iconic album. You've got a lot of very iconic songs on it. And I feel like you can't go wrong with this album. Although I did kind of feel bad for picking this one, because I remember I was talking to some of my friends in the VC and in group chat, and somebody had posed a question. I forget who it was, but it was like, what is an overrated band or an overrated album by a band or whatever? And I had said that like Fleetwood Mac Rumors was very overrated, and I still stand by that. I love the album, and I think it is an essential to have in your collection. But I think there are so many other albums in their discography that are worthy of the praise that Rumors gets. And that may be a very heated topic.
Yes.
But like you mentioned, Bare Trees, an amazing album that no one ever talks about. Their self-titled is just as good as Rumors, and it still doesn't get talked about as much. I love their discography, and I don't know a lot of the Peter Green era stuff, but what I know I like, and I feel like, again, this is a band that's very hard to go wrong with. You could even get their greatest hits. I know a lot of Fleetwood Mac fans don't really like their greatest hits compilation, but I mean, if you think about it, if you're starting out collecting, or you're just trying to get into Fleetwood Mac, it's their popular stuff.
Yeah. But, it's, I mean, like I said, there's a reason why it flies off the shelves, but, I'm a little sad what happened with Lindsey Buckingham, with what they were doing with that, because he's another iconic, writer in his own right.
You think
but
by
that's a
now
conversation
they
for
would
another
be
day.
adults because they're
Is it overrated?
in their 70s? Gosh, be adults about it. Be grown-ups.
No, I don't want
Like,
to be a grown
I feel
up
like they just
about
need
it.
to stop fighting like 12-year-olds and be adults. That's my personal opinion. Whoops.
Mm-hmm. But sorry, not sorry.
Okay.
I'd like to pick another one from your list. Since I have everything up. I'm going to talk. I'd like you to talk about Supertramp's "Breakfast in America." I'm going to say one caveat though. There is one song on the album that is actually one of my least favorite songs.
Which one is
because
that?
of how overplayed it is. But I'd like to hear. I don't even know the name of it. I'll have to think about that. But go ahead and tell everybody about this.
So,
this
Breakfast in
called,
America for
Breakfast in
me
America.
is one of those albums that everyone should own because of how amazing it is, okay? I know Josh doesn't like it and he's giving it a little bit of a bad rap, but this
It's one
it the
song
Logical
I don't like.
That's
Everything
like one
else
of the
I
big
like.
songs for them. Or the title track, Breakfast in America, is another big one.
I believe it's that one.
But the Logical song you'd probably recognize. You hear it on the radio like all the time. At least I do anyway. Goodbye Stranger is another one that's really popular. But okay, so is it Goodbye Stranger maybe or Breakfast in America, the title track?
I think it's
but
probably
I mean,
I think it's probably Goodbye
I love
Stranger.
every song on here front to back. I think that this album is just perfection. Honestly, I have never loved another Supertramp album as much as I love this one. And I've enjoyed other Supertramp albums, but I've not enjoyed them enough to buy them on vinyl, if that tells you anything. For me, if you're going to get this album or get into this band, start off with this album. Not that their other albums are trash or anything, but I'm just saying this one is the best one to start with. And I think the album cover, again, is very iconic. I love the album art. I like how you're kind of seated in an airplane and you're looking in New York City and there's this waitress on it, and I love that whole iconic album art. I think it's one of my favorite album covers too. And I know that's kind of a weird album cover to love, but I think overall it is such an iconic record with so many great songs. And I know it's okay for you to disagree. I don't judge you for disagreeing, but
it's Goodbye Stranger, and it was played too much on the radio. When we used to be at the office, it was overplayed on one station to the point. I like everything about it, but it's the chorus part that it doesn't sit with me. The harmonies, but everything else about the album I like though.
Whole album
it's just
is
that
great.
one song.
I love it.
I'm fine with the rest of the album.
Even if you think a couple of the hits are a little overplayed and overrated, you won't be disappointed by the deep cuts on this one.
Right. And I'm going to knock one off my list here. One of those ones that is basically a greatest hits album. Boston's Self-Titled. Yes, there's a kind of joke going around that all Boston songs sound the same. No, they don't. I mean, obviously they're kind of in the same key, but Boston's Self-Titled, the entire A side is nothing but a greatest hits. But the B side is just as good. And if you like Boston at all, or like any one of their songs, you can't go wrong with this album. And it gets repressed every once in a while. Then it goes out. Then it gets repressed again. So I actually found a relatively older pressing of it at my local thrift store for about $5.
Originals are really easy.
I think I also
I have found several. I've never had an issue finding this record, but I mean, like you said, it is essentially a greatest hits record for Boston.
Yeah, and it's just I've seen them.
That's
It's one
so
of my
cool.
earliest
I
concert
didn't know
memories is
that.
seeing them. And my dad, when he was alive, at the restaurant he worked at, he was able to snag tickets. It was just me and my mom going. The only thing I really remember about it was there was a giant like grain silo that they had on stage.
Uh-huh.
Like I remember some of it. I was real little when I saw this, but I remember that grain silo, and probably the reason why I like them now is
they're a
because
great
of that
band,
concert.
but like I feel like if you're gonna start anywhere
Oh
with their
yeah,
discography, it's definitely gonna have to be their self-titled because it has all their hits on it. I mean, literally any song
it
you
has
would
to
know
be.
from Boston is on that album.
And Foreplay Long Time is one of my favorite songs, but it's also one of my favorite songs to play on like Rock Band. If you remember
Guitar
that thing that was
Hero
called
and
Rock
Rock Band?
Band
What's
years
that?
ago. Yeah. I'm sorry, what's that?
Yeah, totally.
Is it a TikTok filter? But just the timing and the synth and everything, it borders on some prog elements, it borders on some classic rock elements. And what I mean by classic rock is rock and roll, but the elements of it that have stood the test of time. Because now I'm actually hearing Nirvana on the classic rock stations.
I was talking about this
old.
to some of my friends the other day. I'm like, Nirvana's not classic rock. And then Mike over at Retro Spin Vinyl goes, okay, Marichen, but technically because I've taken a music business class, I will tell you this. They consider anything that is over 30 years old classic rock. Even though it is not in the classic rock vein, it is still considered classic rock because of its age. And that made me feel old as shit. Even though, okay, I know that I am not as old as that record or Nirvana records in general because I was born in 1999. But I grew up listening to the 90s and early O's stuff. And for it to be considered classic rock almost at this point makes me want to cry.
I when I heard Pearl Jam and then Soundgarden on there, I was like, I have now officially gotten to old status.
BRB, we're just gonna go take a quick cry.
Yeah. We're gonna take a somber moment to cry, a single tear in the mirror, and come back and continue to record. No, I'm kidding. Another one that's probably going to become classic rock someday.
This
Green
is one
Day.
we agreed on.
We chose American Idiot. Now, this is with a caveat, though. There are some lyrics in there that I do not agree with today. Especially some of the language used. And I don't mind saying swear words and everything, but there's one particular word choice that I think in today's times you probably shouldn't be using, but I can still recommend the album.
Like, for me, it's not my favorite Green Day record. I will tell you that. But I think that this is the one to get if you're going to get a Green Day record because of how iconic it is. The album art, the hand with the heart grenade. I mean, you have so many songs on here that are just iconic for them.
And the connections between the songs and the story they want to tell. It's kind of like their version of the Black Parade, that Pink Floyd concept album kind of, coming together and telling this kind of grand story and, really listening in on the lyrics and, hearing how things are differently disconnected. And it's even an album where I can listen to
without having
a couple
to
of
listen
songs
to the
off
full
of there
album.
and just be fine. But I already know the album in full, so I know the stories that are connected.
About this album, I think for me, like you mentioned, you can listen to it in full and really get the full story. You can also listen to songs just here and there and still get a story, and maybe like you don't know the full story, but you can get a snippet of it. But what I love is that this album is just like a rock epic, and you have so many like mini rock epics in this album that connect and make it one. And
yes.
it is just so beautiful. I was actually between this one and 21st Century Breakdown because I love, like, okay, American Idiot connects very well and tells a good story. So does 21st Century Breakdown. And they broke it down into 3 parts. And those parts interlock and tell the story so well while continuing to still be the same album. Either way, I don't feel like you could go wrong with either album. But 21st Century Breakdown has become pretty hard to find. So I went with American Idiot.
And what's funny is there was some times where I wasn't happy necessarily with overall America. So my friend bought me a European pressing of American Idiot. And I felt at that time, when I wasn't necessarily happy with things that were going on, it was the perfect FU.
It is.
If you think about it. American Idiot on a Euro pressing.
It is just total FU.
And What's Her Name is probably one of my
That is my favorite song on the album. It is so funny that you mentioned that.
Like just that in Letter Bomb, like the lesser known songs are some of the better songs on the album.
I love the hits on the album, but it is the deep cuts that I come back to more.
Yep. And speaking of deep cuts, do you mind if I pick one from my list to chat about? Chicago Transit Authority, also known as the band Chicago. This is a band that is my mom's favorite band for, years and years ago. But is iconic in their own right because they blended jazz, R&B, and rock and roll all in one kind of blender. And, I mean, this is their debut album. It gets repressed quite a bit. Actually, it's the one band I own the most albums for. I am missing but one greatest hits compilation. I'll have the entirety of the Terry Kath and Peter Cetera era. That is like 18 plus LPs. So I know my Chicago, but what I love about that is Terry Kath is one of the most iconic and, in my opinion, underrated guitar players that are talked about. There's even well-known documentation that Jimi Hendrix attended one of Chicago's shows and went backstage. And he said that Terry Kath was the better guitar player.
He is a great guitar player. I will
that
give him that. I'm not a huge fan of Chicago, but he's a great guitar player. I can commend that. Yeah, you sent that
You've heard Freeform Guitar, correct? Can you grasp what the hell he did on that guitar?
I'm not a musician. I love music, but I am not a musician. And I can't even grasp some of the simplest things about playing an instrument. And he just freaking blew my mind.
Yeah, with Freeform Guitar. But also, how simple is it to start your very first album saying, introduction, this is who we are as a band. Saying, hello, everybody. And then going into musically, what you're about. And this guy was a genius because there are so many complex time signatures and everything. Because I used to play instruments. I still play my guitar from now and then. And just the tight playing of all the music and the musicianship on this is why I recommend this. And for me, it's probably like a little bit of a dark horse, but I wanted to at least have something kind of R&B and bluesy-ish kind of in there. So that was kind of my choice with that.
I feel like we've kind of done diverse stuff, even though we've mentioned a lot of classic rock. I feel like what we've mentioned has been kind of diverse within the classic rock genre. So I get it.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to hear
Eric Clapton. He is one of my favorite guitar players, so it's funny that you mentioned that right after you talk about one of your favorites. I love this man. I think he's such genius. And 461 Ocean Boulevard is the album that I would recommend because I think it does have a lot of his hits that you'll recognize. It is not my favorite. I think my favorite would have to be Slow Hand. I love that album as well. I feel like you really couldn't go wrong with either album, but I feel like between the two, I see 461 Ocean Boulevard slightly more. Although those are probably two of the albums I see the most from Eric Clapton. He's just such a genius guitar player. And, like, while he may not be, like, you know, Jimi Hendrix or Terry Cat level, okay, he's still good. And he's just absolutely one of my favorites. I have gotten so much into the British blues genre lately, and I blame that on Emma over at 8 Vinyl Low. Actually, I don't blame her. I love her for that because I already loved a lot of British rock, and I've definitely gotten more into the British blues, and Eric Clapton does have a lot of blues influence, and I guess I never really, like, thought about how much blues influence he had until I really started getting into a lot of the British blues genre that Emma talks about on her channel. And overall, I think he's a really great artist to kind of dive into. If you don't know a lot about classic rock or you don't know a lot about Eric Clapton, 461 Ocean Boulevard is kind of a great starter record for me because, again, you have iconic album art, you have iconic songs on it. He covered I Shot the Sheriff, which is one of his kind of big songs, and it's a great album all around. I love him so much, and every time I think of Clapton, and this is like a total weird reference again, and if you watch that 70s show, you probably know where I'm gonna go with it, but the priest or the preacher, whatever you want to call him, comes over to the foreman's house because, you know, Kitty Foreman is all about, like, you know, the teenagers are into the devil stuff. They're using drugs and rock music. You know how it is in the 70s. And the priest is coming over. Draw what you think Jesus looks like. And then, you know, you have Eric, Kelso, and Hyde, and they all draw Clapton. And I laugh because every time I see a picture of Jesus now, I'm like, Clapton. And I shouldn't be like that, but it just, it reminds me of that scene. I love that scene. Funny. I think it's hilarious that, like, Jesus is Clapton to them. And it's so funny. He is a great guitarist, and I love his music.
Yeah, it's you know, when I think of Clapton, I think of, like, Cream and Derek and the Dominoes. They have a lot of good stuff, too. Because he was prolific before he was a solo artist, and then he became a solo artist, and, you know, just the way he makes his guitar not sing, but just the way he makes his guitar
I get it. And if
work.
You've listened to Clapton,
you know what I'm saying?
You know.
Totally. Let's talk about an artist that we both chose
Joni
something
Mitchell.
different, and that's Joni Mitchell. Joni Mitchell, yes. I'll go with mine. I went with Court and Spark, and what drew me into this one was one of my favorite bands is Opeth, a metal band, and there was a video where Michael from the band, the lead singer, was hopping into a record shop, and he said 5 essential albums that I feel you should own. And I had not heard of Court and Spark. I knew of Joni Mitchell, but I had not heard Court and Spark.
It's such a beautiful record, isn't it? And I know what video you're talking about, too. And I just want to say, I've never really listened to Opeth. But I love watching the What's in My Bag at Amoeba videos. And I honestly, if I did not know anything about Opeth, I would have not pegged them for, like, a metal band, because he talks so sweet and dainty, and I love it.
Yes. Now, Michael had a lot of, like, death growls and stuff, but they become more prog. especially with called a Venom and their most recent
Mm-hmm.
one, and Sorceress is a lot more prog elements. So he is singing a lot more because you do the death growls too much and it hurts your voice. So
Yeah.
he can still do it. It's just, it's kind of interesting. But for me, I'd heard of Joni Mitchell, but then I decided, okay, let me get into her music. And what a damn good
It
way
is
to
one of her
start Joni
underrated
Mitchell.
records.
It
I
is
feel like it doesn't
such
get
a good
talked
album.
about enough. But I mean, I'm also a big fan of Joni, and I
Mm-hmm.
honestly I don't find fault in her work at
Yep.
all. And I know some people are probably going to come for me for that because a lot of people don't really like her later career, and that's fine. But I absolutely love her. I think she's
Mm-hmm.
done absolutely
Totally
nothing
fine.
wrong. And I know that's probably really bad as a music fan to think that. But there are just those bands and artists where, like, they could have the crappiest album and you still love it. And she's one of those for me.
Yep. I know you
I
chose
did
Blue.
choose Blue
So why did you
because
choose that
I
one?
feel like this album has so many beautiful songs and it really encompasses her work and what I feel like a lot of people would enjoy. This is one of my favorite rainy day records, one of my favorite sad records. There are so many beautiful songs. Little Green is
Mm-hmm.
one of my all-time favorite Joni songs. It's on this album. River is absolutely beautiful. A Case of You is on here. This whole album, I feel like it could honestly almost be a greatest hits for her because of how many hits are on this. But the deep cuts that are on this are also just so beautiful. And I was kind of between Blue
Totally.
and my other favorite Joni Mitchell album, Ladies of the Canyon, because again, that one does have some hits on it and
Mm-hmm.
it also has some really great deep cuts. But I think that Blue is very accessible, and if I had to pick one album to tell you to get from Joni, it would be Blue, because I think it's just a great place to start because of how iconic the hits are and how
Right.
amazing the deep cuts are. And really, honestly, if you've never listened to anything by Joni Mitchell, go grab Blue, wait for a good rainy day, and just listen
Yep.
to it. And it will just vibe so perfectly with your rainy day. Anytime there's a
Yes.
rainy day, I have to listen to it.
Yep. Yes. And speaking of kind of iconic hits, Prince of the Revolution, Purple Rain. I mean, one of my strongest memories, and this is going in now to sports ball. Do not at me. Prince had the best halftime show, bar none. Like, I literally just decided, not this past year, but the year before, I was not interested in that halftime show. So I went online and I actually put on Prince's halftime show. This album
Mm-hmm.
is a soundtrack. If you haven't seen the movie, it's R rated, but
It
it's
is.
one of those iconic music movies. And, Prince was such a grand musical mind. Like, we're not going to have another David Bowie and we're not going to have another Prince. Like, the the genre blending that he's able to do on this album is astounding. You have R&B, you have hip hop, you have rock and roll, you have soulful vocal work,
Mm-hmm.
all wrapped up in a nice little bun. And Purple Rain is not even like, in my, like, it's hard to even say what I want to
Yeah,
say
I
about these
remember
songs
the
because they're just
first
so
time I
good.
ever listened to this album. I was just blown away. Like, I always really loved Prince's appearance, and I loved his style, and I
Oh, yeah.
loved his album art, but I never really like listened to a lot of his stuff. And I remember I first listened to Purple Rain, and it blew my mind how amazing it was. And like you said, he mixed different genres and made it fit so well together. And just I don't know, he has such amazing album art too for some of his albums. They're just so beautiful.
Yeah. And
that's
have
one
you
I've
heard
not heard.
his
I've
very
not heard
first
all
album
of his
For You?
discography, but I want to get to around to listening to it all.
When you listen to that album, keep in mind, here's a very young Prince.
I heard that.
And
I know he
played
started
every single instrument
very
on that
young.
album.
Was it like 14 or something like that?
I want to
I remember that like
to the
people
internet
talking about he played every instrument on his first album, and I know he was very young. He was a minor. I remember that, but I can't remember exactly what age.
Yes, I
I
believe
feel
so.
really bad for not remembering that, especially since I'm the one to bring it up.
Yeah, but it's like, what can we say about Prince again that hasn't been said? And here's the thing: this is literally it's a soundtrack album.
Oh yeah,
but it doesn't even feel
honestly,
like a
if
soundtrack.
I didn't know that there was a movie to this, I wouldn't know that this was a soundtrack. Let's see, I am trying to figure out how old he was whenever his first album come out.
Yeah, well, it was released in 78.
Okay, so maybe he wasn't a minor when it was released. So, I feel like he was. I don't know. Anyway, he was very young, especially for the music industry. That's the whole point.
But, yeah. Yeah, he was born in 58. So, we can do the process of typing out. Calculator, where are you, calculator? We're doing this live, everybody, but you're hearing this recorded. What I say, 78? No, that's not what I wanted. 78. Oh, there's also a commercial. Call me Gramps if you want. But there's a commercial that says, for one of those Vinyl of the Month clubs, that says the original, and it's his second album. Like, you know the one where it's like him and it's his self-title?
No, it does
you
not
do
exist.
know For You exists, correct? A card. It's like, it bugs me to this day whenever I see it. He was 20 when he first put out that album.
Yeah, so, you know.
Pretty young. But one of those iconic, musicians that we're never going to see again. And to me, what's more, poetic than Purple Rain in the Rain with a marching band? Like, you can't get more epic of, a soundtrack than that. I mean, Prince freaking commanded Mother Nature for a perfect performance. That's how iconic he is. And he even wrote the More Stay in the Time songs on that, the movie. So, it's crazy. Have you heard the unreleased third verse?
It's been a while, because I usually just put on the record and go on. And I'm awful when it comes to, like, B-sides.
Well, it's not on the record.
And remixes and all that stuff. I'm awful with that.
Yep. But, what happens with that is it was recorded live, and there's an extended version that keeps getting taken down, and someone keeps uploading it, and that means the quality keeps going down and down and down. But he recorded it live, and then they put that right on the record. So it's literally, when you see the ending of Purple Rain, when all that's going down and there's a performance, it's basically a video of the performance.
I gotcha.
But there's a performance in the movie, if you know what I'm saying. So, we're getting a little more away straight from what we're talking about here.
Okay,
But
we can
let's talk about the
Beatles.
Beatles for a little bit.
All right. We had different albums on this one, right?
Right.
I
had Abbey Road,
Rubber Soul.
and I think you had Rubber Soul. Right.
For me,
and what was your reasoning behind Rubber Soul?
It is my favorite Beatles album. I will say it's always been between Rubber Soul and Revolver, but I feel like a part of me loves Rubber Soul more. And I think why I chose this one over Abbey Road is because of the fact that I think Abbey Road is a little overplayed. While I think it is a good record to have in your collection and I really enjoy it, I think that Rubber Soul gives you this different side to the Beatles that you may not know. And that's why I think I chose it, because I feel like a lot of people know the side of the Beatles, like the Abbey Road side. And they know, like, the Beatles number ones, which is, like, a compilation of a lot of their number one hits and stuff. I feel like a lot of people know that side of the Beatles, and they don't really know the Rubber Soul, Revolver, Magical Mystery Tour, all, like, the White Album, that kind of, the different non-mainstream stuff. And that is kind of what I tend to go for when it comes to the Beatles.
Totally, because they got a lot of interesting deep stuff, especially when George Harrison added a little more exotic.
And I love that. I think that's so
kind of
cool.
world music influences.
That's a beautiful
For me,
song.
I picked Abbey Road because Here Comes the Sun. It's that's one of my favorite songs from childhood.
I can agree with
that's
that.
That's going to be one of my favorite songs.
It always makes me happy every time I hear it.
Yeah, it's just a happy song. And of course, it launched the Paul is Dead theory, all this stuff. It's iconic for a reason. I have an early pressing that has the great cover on it. I mean, what can be said about this? I don't think you could go wrong.
I almost actually chose the Beatles number ones because it had a lot of their number one hits that I felt like a lot of people would know, and I kind of find that essential. But, like, to me, I also just felt like it's essential to know more by the Beatles than just that number one kind of stuff, because their deep cuts are so good. And, like, even on Abbey Road, like, you have so many iconic songs on Abbey Road, but, like, Octopus's Garden, Maxwell's Silver Hammer, two of my favorite songs on that album, and no one ever really talks about them. And they're two of my favorite tracks from the Beatles.
Yep, I mean, a lot of good stuff on there. Also, keep in mind, if you get like a different pressing from a different set of countries, the track listing might be a little bit different. But don't be afraid of that. Embrace that. That's what's one cool thing about the Beatles. I'm going to keep us moving right along because we have been talking almost 2 hours here. Ooh, boy. Foo Fighters. Let's knock out the last one of our where we matched artists, but chose a different album. And the one you chose, it's on my list to grab. But I have my own personal reasons why I chose it.
I feel like
I know
this
you
one
chose the
for
color and the shape.
Is the one album I gravitate to the most in terms of the Foo Fighters, which, I mean, this could almost be a greatest hits record for them, in my opinion. And it's so good.
Yes.
I finally just got this one on vinyl, like, right at the end of last year. And I was so excited because I've been wanting this album on vinyl for so long. But you have the classic Foo Fighters songs that everyone knows on this record, mixed with some really killer deep cuts. And I've always loved the simplicity of the album art on this one. I don't know why, but just, it's so simple, and the album speaks volumes, and it's one of my favorite records of all time, honestly.
Yeah. and I'm not even gonna argue. It's a good album to go with. Um, the reason I went with mine is Wasting Light is the one I chose. And this one represents a personal time for me. But if you're a fan of one particular movie called Thor, the ending credits sequence has the song Walk on it. And it's basically, I think, the thesis of the entire movie, and the framing and everything is that song. And it's also a song that it's helped me, but there is so many good songs on here. Like, you have Rope, which is so good. Bridge Burning, like that, like the beginning of that just hits me when I first listen to that. Of course, White Limo is Dave Grohl being very scratchy vocals, and I love that. These days, not one of my favorite songs, but one that you'll recognize definitely. But to me, it's one album that I can recommend because it sounds good. And also, they took the time and care with this one because it's cut at 45. Like, the standard is a 45 RPM record, bar none. And the digital version is cut from the 45 record, so you don't even have to digitize the record. They went and made sure that it's one of the best fidelity sounding records that you can buy. That, to me, is an applaud. But it's just, to me, it represents a few of their kind of older-ish songs. So you don't gravitate towards, say, like My Hero, but you gravitate more towards a little bit of the newer stuff.
I do like
this would be a good
Light.
one for you as well. That's
too.
why
I don't have it on vinyl, but I want to. So
definitely get it. It is very good. It might be accessible at the time I got it at my local shop. At the time of this recording, that's probably one that's kind of borderline. I don't know if you're going to be able to get it.
No, you're not.
But I'm allowed one exception on the list.
Gosh, what are you talking about? Kidding. We know I love my sarcasm.
Oh, okay. I know. I'd like to hear what you have to say about Joy Division.
Honestly, Joy Division for me is another one of those. It's like, I get emo, I need a good cry. It's kind of my, like, emo side coming out when I listen to Joy Division. And I feel like these guys are kind of underrated because they only have 2 albums because the lead singer passed away. And then they actually kind of formed a new band called New Order, which still puts out music today. And I've not really listened to a lot of New Order stuff just because I love Ian,
New Order, yep.
And I don't know if I could really, like, get past a new vocalist. I've listened to some New Order stuff, but I definitely lean more toward Joy Division. And the album that I think is essential is Unknown Pleasures. I mean, their other album, Closer, you really can't go wrong with either, but Unknown Pleasures is very iconic in terms of album art. It's a black cover, and it's got, like, these little mountains that are designed on it. It is super iconic, and
yes,
I love, again, the simplicity of that album art. I think it's just very easy, and it doesn't take away from the beauty of the album. And I know that a lot of people in the vinyl community, like, when I talked about this album on my own channel, they're like, oh, I don't really listen to Joy Division, or this album is not one that I've not really been interested in. And I think that's really sad because this is such a classic. And maybe it might not be super essential because I feel like, again, like I said, a lot of people don't really know this record or don't really know it as well as some of the other classic records that we've talked about. But I feel like if you want to dive deeper into the rock genre, this is a really good place to go because it is still kind of pretty accessible. It's still pretty iconic, but it's also something that not everyone talks about. So
it's also one I don't have. So that's I mean, I've been meaning to listen to it, but of course you only have the finite resources, but that cover just
It is absolutely
speaks
beautiful.
volumes to the album itself. So while we both have chosen a pseudo soundtrack, I wanted to pick one soundtrack. And to me, that's the Labyrinth soundtrack from the Jim Henson production. And of course, it's David Bowie. But just the instrumentals on it are great. But just Dance Magic Dance, it's iconic 80s, and it's a soundtrack you can't go wrong with. If you're not even into soundtracks, it's just as an album, it's great. It's it mixes the orchestral stuff with Bowie singing, and Bowie's touch of charm and everything that he happens to have is ever present in
Bowie's Bowie.
this album.
I mean,
it's crazy. Bowie's Bowie. So we each have one left.
That's fine.
Do you mind if I go and then we end off with yours? All right. So the last one I have chosen is Van Halen's 1984. If you were on that live stream where I was talking about Van Halen, I've since listened to 1984, and while 5150 is probably one that means a little bit more to me, I love 1984. Like, for a band that basically exploded in the wrong way, where David Lee Roth left, you would have thought that they weren't going through crazy stuff with what you're hearing on this album. I mean, it's just iconic. And there's a new repressing that was done by Chris Bellman. And my God, it's one of the best sounding records I own in my collection. And there's, songs like I'll Wait, Panama. I mean, what else can I say about that particular rock song? It's just amazing beginning to end. And it's got an album cover you will never forget in your life. Because when you first see it, you're like, whoa. It's kind of like the first time seeing Heaven and Hell from Black Sabbath.
That you're right.
If you know what
in
I'm talking
terms
about.
of Van Halen's discography, this is the one that I would consider the most essential because of how, that too. I could see that.
Either that or one.
Both of those albums have so many well-known hits, and I prefer the David Lee Roth era. I know people that love both, and I know people that prefer the Hagar era. That's fine, but for me, I love both of those albums, and you couldn't go wrong with adding either one to your collection. 1984 is very accessible, new or used, very easy to find.
No. Yep. I'm just also plugging the new one because the work that Chris Bellman did on that, on the pressing of thing. Yes. I'm all for that.
Yes.
But I know you had one from Pat Benatar. I didn't even think of Pat Benatar until you talked about the list, but I'd love
Pat
to hear
Benatar.
what you have to say about
firstly,
the album.
I've gotten to meet her, and she is an absolute sweetheart. I got to see her perform, and I met her after, and she was literally one of the nicest people I've ever met in my entire life. And her husband, Neil, who's also the guitar player for her, he's also very, very kind, and they were just so gracious, and she's so sweet. I honestly could not praise her enough. She's definitely one of my favorite celebrities that I've met. And this album for me, I chose In the Heat of the Night because if you're going to get a Pat Benatar album, this would be the one with her big hits on it that you love. You also have some really good deep cuts on here. And it's probably the one I gravitate toward the most. Like, I have 3 copies of this in my collection. Do I need 3 copies? No, but they're all different. And I love them all so much.
No.
And I mean, I actually have one framed because I love the album art so much. And I love every single song on here. I think it's flawless front to back. And if you love women with powerful vocals, she's definitely one artist to get into because her vocals are amazing. And the day I saw her, she said, "I'm going to apologize in advance. I have a cold. I sound awful." And she killed it. She literally killed it. She nailed it so hard. And I was like, when I met her, I was like, I didn't even know. Like, if you wouldn't have said, "I have a cold," I wouldn't have ever known. You sounded amazing. And she did. She sounded fantastic. Another classic.
I have 2 albums from her.
I love Seven the Hard
Crimes
Way
of
too.
Passion,
Such a good album.
and Seven the Hard Way.
Tropico is probably my favorite album.
I love the artwork on Seven the Hard Way.
I also I almost picked Tropico because I love the album art, but I know that a lot of people might not connect with that album like they would in The Heat of the Night or Crimes of Passion. So.
Yeah. Crimes of Passion is a good one too, but it wasn't one. I don't know why. When I was thinking through things, I just went with my gut. At the moment, I was like, okay, we're at 20, boom, boom. But now that I think about it, that probably would be one to add for me. But like I said, we've given you what, over 40 albums here, I would say, to think about. And here's the thing: we still have more that we could talk about. This is a subject that you could go on for hours and hours and hours. We've gone on for 2 hours now. I think this is one of our longest
are all
episodes.
Albums that I feel like everyone knows and loves and should own. And if they don't know and love it, you should listen to it and check it out.
Yes, but I'm going to give one more that everybody should check out because it just came out. Both you and I love it. You need to grab it while you still can. The Pretty Reckless, Death by Rock and Roll. I now feel like that is an essential album, but that is modern that was the last one I was going to add is kind of like a curveball. But yeah. And for people that say, why didn't you include Soundgarden? Get the
there will be a part 2 to this at some point. Because, I mean, I've been thinking of other albums I could have.
Yeah. Yep. But I've crossed off 3 because I've talked about them already. But the secondary list I have, that's another episode that I could talk about. So, do you have any closing thoughts for our listeners? All right. Well, I hope you are well. And if you're hearing this after our Record Store Day episode, because we're going to try and get that out as soon as possible if the list happens to drop on my birthday, great. If not, you'll hear from us about the list when that comes up. And that will be our annual, I guess, episode on tips, tricks, and our thoughts on the list for what's coming out with that album. So keep an eye out for that. If you have made it this far, comment smile down below and tell us what one of your favorite songs is. We love to hear from you down in the comments down below. All of our socials are located in the description below. And we've got some great episodes coming up. I'm excited for the next couple of episodes that are coming up. Because we have some special guests lined up coming soon. So you'll hear those when we get there. This podcast is trying to be bi-monthly. So you're going to get a week off and then you're going to hear our sexy voices twice a month. That's the goal. So knock on wood. Wait, I have paper here. So knock on wood that we get that going. But until the next time, as I say in everything that I'm in, when the waters get rough, please keep on sailing. You are not alone in this world. You may feel alone, but you're not. You're a unique you. But there are people out there who love and care about you and want the best for you. I am one of those. I know Marichen is probably wishing the best for you. So, we're all going through a lot of shit right now. And, you're not alone. And you're never alone. Please don't feel that way. I believe in you. Marichen believes in you. You could do the thing. You could do whatever you put your mind to. So until next time, take care. We love you. And, okay, let's hit stop right